Washington has crossed what many once saw as the final threshold, using military force to choke the Strait of Hormuz, the world's energy artery. With President Donald Trump ordering a blockade and authorizing interdictions even in international waters, the question is no longer if escalation will occur, but how fast. On April 12th, Trump announced the immediate deployment of U.S. naval forces prepared to use force against any vessel deemed linked to the disputed fee, even on the high seas. The move followed the collapse of U.S.-Iran talks in Islamabad, which had aimed to end a 6-week conflict in the Middle East. Posting on Truth Social, Trump said negotiations had shown progress, but stalled over the core issue, Iran's nuclear program. The blockade, he stressed, would apply to any ship entering or exiting the Strait of Hormuz, with the possibility of additional nations joining the effort. In an interview with Fox News, Trump added that the U.S. and its partners are deploying mine countermeasure vessels to clear sea mines allegedly laid by Iran. He accused Tehran of blackmailing the world by leveraging control over the strategic waterway and signaled that mine-clearing operations are imminent. "I have ordered the Navy to track and interdict any vessel on the high seas that has paid fees to Iran. No exceptions," Trump declared, reiterating a hardline stance first issued before a fragile, Pakistan-mediated ceasefire that held for 2 weeks before collapsing. "Any Iranian force that fires on us or targets civilian shipping will pay a heavy price." In his framing, Tehran knows better than anyone how to stop the escalation cycle now grinding down its own state. In weekend talks, Washington tabled a set of non-negotiable red lines. According to a U.S. official speaking to the press, these included a complete halt to uranium enrichment, the dismantlement of all large-scale enrichment facilities, and the removal of highly enriched uranium stockpiles. Beyond the nuclear file, Washington is pressing for a broader de-escalation framework involving regional allies, a full cessation of support to proxy groups such as Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthi movement, and the full reopening of the Strait of Hormuz, with 0 transit fees imposed. President Donald Trump said Washington secured most of its negotiating objectives except the critical one, Iran's refusal to abandon its nuclear ambitions. In an interview with Fox Business, he stressed that Tehran clearly seeks nuclear weapons, but that outcome will never be allowed. He also argued Iran is misreading its position, acting from perceived strength while the balance of leverage runs the other way. Trump predicted Tehran will ultimately return to the table and accept U.S. terms, underscoring a zero-compromise stance. No almost there deal, full compliance or none. On maritime security, he said the plan to blockade the Strait of Hormuz and constrain Iran's oil exports will be activated soon and produce rapid, tangible effects. He added that the U.S. will sanitize the waterway, denying Iran the ability to weaponize it in the near term. Still, he acknowledged a residual risk: naval mines. Even limited, well-placed minefields could deter high-value commercial shipping by sharply elevating loss risk. President Donald Trump doubled down with a hard warning, asserting the U.S. could overwhelm Iran on a compressed timeline, potentially crippling key energy infrastructure within an hour. He framed this as a credible option, but not the preferred course so long as escalation can still be avoided. Separately, Israel is moving toward a higher state of readiness for a renewed confrontation with Iran. Hebrew-language outlets, including I-24 News, report that the Israel Defense Forces are preparing for escalation following the collapse of U.S.-Iran ceasefire talks. According to the Times of Israel, IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir has ordered heightened alert and readiness for a rapid return to operations. Channel 12 reported on April 12th that Israel is not only bracing for renewed hostilities, but also planning for a potential Iranian surprise strike on its territory. Meanwhile, public broadcaster Khan 11 cited a senior defense official saying Israel is dissatisfied with an early end to the fighting, arguing it failed to generate sufficient pressure on Tehran over its nuclear and ballistic missile programs. Channel 13 added that IDF alert levels have been significantly raised, with senior commanders directing forces to be ready for immediate re-engagement and activating combat preparation protocols. The IDF has not issued an official comment. However, during a visit to southern Lebanon last week, Lieutenant General Eyal Zamir stated that Israeli forces can resume full-scale operations at any time if required. Tensions across the Gulf continue to rise after U.S.-Iran talks in Islamabad ended without agreement. Regional actors are closely tracking next steps. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance confirmed no document was signed, acknowledging significant gaps remain, raising the question of whether diplomacy has stalled or merely paused. Against this backdrop, Pakistan's foreign minister urged both Washington and Iran to sustain the ceasefire despite early setbacks, stressing Islamabad's intent to continue mediating. Other states echoed calls for restraint and a return to negotiations, even as frustration with the outcome is evident. Gulf states such as Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates remain particularly exposed, having been recurrent targets in Iran-linked strike cycles. Missile and UAV attacks on energy infrastructure, airports, and urban centers have disrupted oil output and elevated systemic risk for global energy markets. This trajectory is forcing a broader regional shift toward expanded air defense and early warning capabilities. Beyond the major powers, states like Bahrain, Qatar, and Kuwait face comparable threat vectors, underscoring how Iran's strategic reach now spans the Gulf. The widespread use of UAVs and ballistic missiles enables Tehran and its proxies to conduct low-cost, long-range strikes with disproportionate operational impact. Notably, Iran-aligned militias in Iraq show signs of reactivating military campaigns after previously executing hundreds of attacks, including strikes on U.S. diplomatic facilities and personnel. These moves are sustaining a high-alert environment across the theater. The situation is also disrupting shipping flows and energy exports, pushing Gulf states to deepen defense coordination with the United States. In parallel, regional media are dissecting the fault lines in the negotiation process, particularly the nuclear file and security dynamics in the Strait of Hormuz. At the strategic level, the failure of the first negotiation round has pushed the Middle East into a more defined state of uncertainty. Regional states are caught between cautious optimism that talks may resume and growing concern over escalation risks, while their leverage over the process remains limited. Pakistan is working to preserve its mediator role, attempting to pull Washington and Iran back to the table, though prospects remain fragile. According to Channel 12, Saturday's talks ended without agreement, with the U.S. delegation departing on April 12th. The central sticking point remains Iran's nuclear program, specifically whether Iran will retain any uranium enrichment capability. Negotiators indicate that if convergence is achieved on the nuclear file, other contentious tracks, ballistic missiles, security in the Strait of Hormuz, and proxy activity. On the ground, however, military dynamics continue to exert upward pressure on the escalation ladder. One notable factor is the resilience of the naval component of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. Fast attack patrol craft remain largely intact. According to World Tribune, over 60% of IRGC patrol capacity in the Strait of Hormuz has survived 6 weeks of fighting with the U.S. and Israel. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is assessed to be maintaining a fleet of small, fast attack craft and assault boats equipped with missiles and naval mines to exert control over the Strait of Hormuz. U.S. media analysis highlights that their small size and high maneuverability make them significantly harder to detect and neutralize than Iran's conventional naval platforms, sustaining a persistent challenge for any military operation in the area. The IRGC is also believed to conceal many of these craft in underground facilities, further complicating detection and tracking. As a result, recent U.S. and Israel strikes have focused primarily on Iran's conventional navy rather than the IRGC's fast boat force. Even so, some IRGC assets have been destroyed, including vessels such as Iris, Terrace, Traz, and Sarari, platforms capable of launching anti-ship and surface-to-air missiles. The vessel Cis Black Harry, assessed as the IRGC's largest UAV carrier in the Gulf, has also reportedly been hit. However, most of the IRGC's fast attack craft and small boat fleet remains largely intact. This preserves its ability to contest and control the Strait of Hormuz, including the deployment and management of naval mines along this narrow but critical maritime corridor. By contrast, heavy losses in Iran's conventional navy have had limited impact on the overall control dynamics in the theater. Meanwhile, the U.S. has begun deploying unmanned underwater systems to conduct mine countermeasure operations in the Strait of Hormuz. With U.S.-Iran talks in Islamabad stalled, U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, announced additional military measures to secure freedom of navigation along this critical corridor. Admiral Brad Cooper stated that a new maritime safety corridor is being established and will be communicated to the global shipping community to sustain commercial flow. CENTCOM confirmed further force deployments, including unmanned underwater vehicles, to expand mine-clearing capacity in theater. The move reflects concerns that Iran seeded naval mines in the strait during recent fighting, raising the risk of disruption to one of the world's most vital energy choke points. Roughly 20% of global oil and LNG transit this route, Any interruption would trigger cascading economic effects. Estimates suggest Iran holds between 2,000 and 6,000 naval mines, deployable rapidly via small craft. U.S. officials also warn Tehran may have lost track of some mine placements, elevating the hazard profile for civilian shipping operating in the area. Control of the Strait of Hormuz remains a central bottleneck in U.S.-Iran negotiations. To hedge against disruption, the U.S. has surged guided missile destroyers and expanded mine countermeasure capacity. Alongside legacy Avenger-class mine countermeasure ships and MH-53E Sea Dragon helicopters, forces are fielding MH-60S Seahawk aircraft equipped with laser mine detection and remote neutralization systems. Advanced unmanned systems, including a QS-20 sonar and influence sweep gear, are improving detection and clearance safety. Parallel efforts, including Israeli unmanned surface and subsurface technologies, are further strengthening protection of key sea lanes. Separately, empty tankers are redirecting toward the U.S. to load. Trump framed the move as preemptive market stabilization amid stalled talks in Islamabad, a hedge against supply shocks if the Strait of Hormuz is constrained. Posting on Truth Social, he said even the largest carriers are inbound for high-quality, low-sulfur oil and gas, urging faster turnaround to leverage U.S. supply dominance. From a market lens, energy analyst Rory Johnston noted on X that the influx of empty tankers into the U.S. to offset potential disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz is a constructive signal. It suggests the market is actively rebalancing to absorb geopolitical risk. Johnston's shipping data shows the flow is dominated by VLCCs, ultra-large crude carriers with approximately 2 million barrels capacity, heading toward the U.S. Gulf Coast. A separate shipping and commodities analyst on X assessed that U.S. crude exports may be entering an expansion phase. Trump responded with a brief, "Great," before reiterating a bullish energy outlook. According to the U.S. Energy Information Administration, U.S. crude output stood at roughly 13 million barrels per day in 2023, well ahead of both Russia and Saudi Arabia at around 10 million barrels per day each. Conversely, the conflict with Iran is imposing a growing fiscal burden on Israel. Initial estimates from Israel's finance ministry put cost at 35 billion shekels, approximately $11.5 billion, with upside risk as second-order economic effects materialize. The conflict is driving higher public spending while weighing on growth, production, and business activity. Of the total, roughly $6.2 billion has been allocated to defense and military operations, including funding for the Israel Defense Forces, the Defense Ministry, the National Security Ministry, and associated security agencies. This massive outlay has been baked directly into Israel's 2026 national budget. Beyond military spending, the government has earmarked roughly $3.4 billion for compensation, covering missile damage, business disruption, and wage support for workers placed on unpaid leave during the conflict. An additional approximately $280 million has been allocated to essential civilian costs, including healthcare operations, emergency response, and continuity of social services, underscoring the strain on public infrastructure and welfare systems. Finance Minister Bezalel Smotrich stressed that tight, disciplined fiscal management is critical under crisis conditions, arguing that current policy has helped stabilize the economy while sustaining military objectives. Overall, the conflict with Iran is not only imposing a heavy fiscal burden on Israel, but also generating broad economic fallout, driving higher public spending while directly impacting households, production, and business activity. At the very moment it was expected to deliver calm,